Hi Bookworms, Admin LJ here with another one of our exciting author Q&As. A little disclaimer before we actually get into today's chat. I'm having some tech issues. Got to blame the weather, the full moon, everything else that's going on in the world. My mic is getting occasionally warbled as I talk, so if you have any difficulties understanding what I'm saying, if things are coming across a little weird, just throw that in the comment section down below and I will try to clear up whatever it is I said or we're talking about as we're talking. And yeah, so just bear with us, guys. But I'm really excited about this chat. I love talking with this author. She's brilliant and just a lot of fun to talk to, and the book is really exciting. You can't really tell on my shelf right now, but I actually struggled to get it to stand up straight because it's so bent and kind of creased from all of the reading I've done the last few days reading through this book. So I definitely loved it. I can't wait to talk about it with the author and with you guys. As always, if you have questions for the author about her work, the book, her writing, kind of anything and everything, throw that down in the comments section. Everyone who leaves us a question will be automatically entered to win a flash giveaway at the end of our broadcast. So I hope you'll join us and hang out with us. You know, I love to talk to everyone. Um, Without further ado, today's special guest is Aya De Leon. She is a writer, activist, educator, a spoken word poet, and an award-winning author. She has written for publications such as Essence, Ebony, The Huffington Post, Vice, Bitch Magazine, and many more. And she teaches poetry and spoken word at UC Berkeley. She's got a really fun background and a lot of knowledge. And the book we're talking about is her newest release, Queen of Urban Prophecy. Let's see if I get in the shot. There we go. In this book, stardom crashed like an avalanche onto a female rap artist who is now out seeking justice, real power, and true respect in the hardest fight of her life to become a star and to find her place in the world. This is an own voices narrative that confronts the rampant misogyny of the music industry and is perfect for readers who are interested in stories that tackle race, power, and the dynamics of gender. So there's a lot to talk about. So without further ado, let's get started and help me welcome our special guest.
Hello, hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a delight to be here today.
Before we get super into everything, I talked a little bit about the book. Obviously, my mic is messing up already. Can you tell readers in your own words a little bit about this book?
Well, this book has sort of come together from two different places. One is my Justice Hustlers series with Kensington Books has this character, Taisha Cuvelier, who has this niece who's an aspiring rapper. That book came out in 2017. And, this niece rapper sort of stayed in my mind as a character that I was really curious about. And also around that same time, my brand at Kensington has very much been sort of both crime fiction and romance, where the narratives had a romance in them, but also had heists or spying or, other kind of traditional crime fiction stuff and, strong social justice themes. And I wondered when I started writing for Kensington, because it's such a strong brand with romance, like, could I write a more traditional romance that sort of had both characters' perspectives and I decided I wanted to try it. And a place that was really interesting to me to write on, because you have to have people kind of thrown together, was a tour bus. I liked the idea of a hip hop tour bus and to flip the gender a little, like the woman was an MC and her DJ and like what would happen. So this is the story of Desa, who is the protege of kind of the top rapper, Thug Woofer. And she's sort of rocketed to stardom with this protege status. And just as her album is about to come out, her debut album, it's got, mostly tracks about kind of leading that hot girl rapper life, sex, romance. But there's this bonus track that almost didn't make the album, a story of a girl who is killed by police violence, a girl named Shaquana, in high school, killed on her way home. And the album comes out, and then shocking everyone, including Desa, of course, the protagonist, a girl named Shaquana, is killed by police violence on her way home. Um, and it becomes this kind of coincidence that people are calling her a prophet. And so she's already been sort of rocketed into the spotlight when she still has some maturity issues to work through. And now, on top of that, there's this whole question of prophecy and people in the media and social media sort of debating, is she a prophet? Is she a fraud? Is it just a coincidence? Is she any good as a rapper? And that begins this wild tour across the nation, multi-city stadium tour. So it's really about her being way out of her depth in a lot of ways, and her struggle to kind of make sense of what's happening.
I, like I said, I love this book, and I'm just going to mute you while I'm talking because I think the echo is what's giving us trouble. I'm going to test this theory live on air. Should have tested it before we came on air. Um, but I've already said a little bit that I love all the layers that are packed into this story. And, especially as someone who does work on social media, and I know you're very prolific on social media. I really loved seeing that element woven throughout this story in so many different areas. Can you talk a little bit more about what it meant to you to weave that into the story and all those ups and downs that are caused by social media, both positive and negative?
Well, one of the things that I want to say that's so interesting, when I was just starting out as a writer, when I was writing, I wouldn't read anything else because I didn't want it to influence me. I didn't want it to influence my voice, none of that. And, now that I'm, 6 books in, I read other things while I'm writing and love it when they influence me. So one of the things that really influenced this book when I was writing it, I was reading two other novels. Um, One was One to Watch, which is a fabulous romance. It's like a literary romance about a plus size woman on a dating show, and there's all this social media drama in it. And it was so inspiring. I was like, yes, I want social media drama. So I wrote that in. And the other book that I was reading was Who is Vera Kelly by Rosalie Connect. And that is definitely not a romance. It's like a historical lesbian literary spy novel, during the Cold War. And it was told in alternating chapters, kind of in the present and flashing back to her childhood. And I was like, oh, I love that. I'm going to do that too. So the social media, and it's One to Watch is certainly not the only book that includes that, but I loved the idea of, as opposed to writing in prose, and these are the things that are happening in the background, just having kind of like the social media drama in there, the bloggers, people on Twitter, all the folks kind of in the background with this hum of media and social media. And I feel like that was the thing that really brought the book more to life, was this whole question of sort of the pop cultural landscape that included other artists, real and imaginary, and social media. So it was really fun to do that, and really fun to kind of even come up with like people's usernames on Twitter and stuff. And I use Twitter. I use Instagram a little bit, and Twitter is a good place to run your mouth. Instagram is more about visuals. I throw out a visual now and then, but really I like running my mouth on Twitter.
I, I'm, I'm kind of the same, but I will also say that that was one of my favorite parts, was seeing those Twitter usernames that you created, because I'm horrible at coming up with names anyways, very bad at usernames. So seeing the creativity you put into that was a little bonus treat. We do have some great reader questions coming in. So I'm going to jump over to some of our reader questions before I take us back to some of the questions I have for you. First, I really love this one. How did you manage to find the right balance so that your story didn't feel overwhelming or overloaded with all of these different storylines and issues that you wove into the tale from the start?
Oh, what a good question. I mean, I think real life is super complicated, right? They're like all these things happening at once. But as a writer, a lot of times I would create the different arcs, right? So we have the romance, we have the tour. I had a sense of like where they were going on the tour. Um, and the different things that were sort of unfolding on the tour. I think and then there's like the drama between the different artists on the tour. So I tried to have a lot going on overall, but not too many things in one place, right? There's also the climate crisis. I've made a commitment to write about the climate crisis, and really it's not hard because the climate crisis is happening everywhere. So no matter where I set a book or what's happening, I think like, how could the climate crisis show up, right? And so she's crisscrossing the country. Some places it's raining, some places it's flooding, some places it's a drought, some places the community is, still traumatized from climate disaster, or there are people who are in one place who used to be in another place. So I just tried to think about, all of the different places that I could work that in. And, it may be too busy for some people. Some people may like a little slower pace, fewer things going on. That's okay. I write books about women who have a lot going on and a lot goes on throughout my books. But yeah, I think I tried to pace myself. So a lot going on, but not all at the same time. Uh-oh, Lauren, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Trying to do too many things at once over here. Yes, I would definitely say that you strike that perfect balance, at least for me. I am definitely, I'm a speed reader. I have to be to work on all the books I work on, plus my fun time reading. Um, so I definitely read quickly, and I am someone who gravitates towards those easy and light stories in my free time. But then I get stories like this one that have those multi layers, but it never, at least with your writing, and I've read multiple of your books at this stage, and your books always feel like those story issues really interconnect because they do all lend to each other. The drama on social media can lead to drama against real people. The misogyny is seen in every level and impacts every level. So it's really fascinating to see those layers compiled and compact on top of each other. um, I am going to jump over to one of the questions I had, and then we'll jump back over to our reader questions because they've got some good ones coming up. One of the things I really wanted to talk about was in this story, kind of right from the jump, we see how fighting for your dream can come in different shapes and forms. And there are instances where you have to decide, is it worth it to keep fighting, especially with the character of Damien. He's being encouraged to give up this dream of becoming a real DJ and go to something more stable like teaching and just, keep music as a hobby instead. And he's determined to not let that happen. He wants it no matter what it costs him. And I found that really intriguing, especially compared to all the different aspects in the novel where, some people didn't have to fight at that level. So I would just love to hear, a little bit about that process and, that concept of fighting for what you want.
Yeah, what a great question. One of the things that I'm always So one of the things I'm obsessed about in these heterosexual romance narratives is like, what is the obstacle, and what are some of the things that the guy has to work through? And, as a feminist, essentially my commitment is that the obstacle will always have something to do with patriarchy and something to do with sexism, and that there's some piece of sexism that the guy has to work out. And the thing that I was really interested in was like Damian is a really nice guy. I have these different like thug woofer who is the rap artist. Desa is his protege. He's Desa's aunt's boyfriend, right? So he is, and he's the bad boy rapper. So he's like the bad boy. So like there were so many choices of what he might have to work through of his sexism to be a worthy partner of Taisha. And I found lots of them. Like he shows up in the first book and he's just so terrible that she doesn't, they don't go far. And then he comes back in the second book, having worked some stuff out, and he's in a little better shape, but he's still got stuff to work through, right? So Damian was interesting. Like, well, sexism doesn't really separate men into like good men and bad men, although there's a lot of narrative about that. I believe all people are good, and some people, you know, have a lot of trauma that makes them behave in ways that, are super toxic. And so I was really interested in like, what are some of the ways that sexism affects nice guys? Like, what are some ways that sexism shows up that aren't about like totally disrespecting women and cheating on them or abusing them? And one of the ways that I think that it shows up is ways that men take for granted female partners, especially if they live with them, that the men start to underfunction and then they let the women overfunction. And um, that was one of the things going on with Damian. And I think there's also a way, I came up you mentioned that I did spoken word, and um, I came up in the spoken word community, and a lot of times there were, we were all sort of young and folks in our 20s, and, everyone's sort of coming up. And then there would be a way that the guys in the community would sometimes have more support to go after their dreams, right? They would have wives and girlfriends who were like, I'll be your secretary. Or they would just, things were set up because of sexism and the kinds of dynamics in heterosexual relationships, that these men had all these built-in support from their relationships and the women didn't. The women had to hustle harder and do more for themselves. So I thought that was really interesting, and I wanted to sort of weave that in. And so, that's part of what's going on with Damian's ex, that she's someone who has sort of backed him in a particular way, and he's taken her for granted. But also there is a way that she's also like, hey, we're going to grow up and we're not going to go after our dreams in the same way. We're going to settle for something practical. So on the one hand, she's, propping him up, but on the other hand, she's also sort of pulling him down. I thought that was a really interesting push-pull dynamic. Um, Also where, she's a leader in that relationship in one particular way. And then we have, the current love interest, Desa, who's also a leader in a different way, but she's really going after the dream. And I liked the idea of the love interest who really respects that, and as a DJ is perfectly set up to sort of back and support her. Um, so yeah, it was really interesting to sort of play with both those dynamics in relationship and those dynamics among artists. And I liked that that was something that he had to work through. He had to get clear that there was some part of him that was ready to skate on his ex-girlfriend's hard work, and that he needed to be ready to kind of like, grow up.
Um, I find all of that really fascinating, and I love how that's shown throughout the book. And like you said, and I really liked and respected the fact that, you know, his ex he never paints her as a villain. She's not a villain in his story. And her wants and dreams are just different from his. And so I loved seeing that too, because so often it's very easy to see, well, the ex didn't support me. So, what do I care about them? They're awful, they're horrible. And, like you said, he is a good guy in his heart, and he doesn't see her as a villain. And so I also really liked that. I always love to not see a woman be painted as a villain just because she wanted what she wanted, and it's different from what a guy wants. um, but on the topic of women, especially women in the industry and going for their dreams, I took a peek at your author's note at the back of this book, which I recommend if you guys are going to read this book, and if you haven't yet, you should. read that author's note once you get done because it's full of fascinating background and information about where this story came from. But one of the things that struck me in that note was you talked about how this book is an extension of a question you asked yourself years ago or that came to you years ago from different conversations. And it's, how do women find power in a cultural conversation called hip hop? And it had me wondering, for you, since this book is a continuation of that, initial discussion, how has that conversation changed over these years? Because I think in the book you mentioned first hearing it in the early 2000s. So what's changed in the last, decades, last few years, even, or has that conversation changed? Are we still in that same place?
Well, one thing, what a great question. When I like in the early aughts, I was doing spoken word and hip hop theater. And, I was kind of in that more young adult space where I could sort of be. I was never a rapper, but I was a hip hop theater artist who rapped occasionally and, even rapped in a couple of clubs and, you know, so I had that experience. I've had the experience of sort of being on stage with a mic, people are drinking and then like I'm in the hip hop space, right? So I've done that and, it was great. It was great practice for writing this book so that I could have some sense of, what it would be like to be someone who was really fully immersed in it. I was never fully immersed in it in this way. And so for me at the time, I pushed myself to do hip hop because it was scary, because it was this boys club, because I worried that I wasn't good enough, because I was terrified of messing up, and messing up in this space where, sometimes there are moments in a movie where like the woman is doing something non-traditional and they're like, don't screw this up or no other women will get in there for the next decade, right? And so that was part of it with hip hop. Like it wasn't just the embarrassment of failing, it's just sort of like failing as a woman in a space where I'm being expected to fail and it's like my job to show that like we can do it. So it was a lot of pressure and it was good. It was good for me. It caused me to grow a lot as a person. Um and that was part of why I did it, because I wanted to challenge myself in that place, partly because hip hop, has been kind of this dominant cultural language that has been much more accessible to men, has been much more about men speaking it. So it was really important to me to kind of like push myself into that conversation, push against my good girl training that like I was going to like write an essay or something that I got more training to do like in college as opposed to hip hop. So it was really important to me. And now, that I'm certainly more middle-aged, it doesn't really it doesn't make sense and have a kid like I'm in bed by 9 so like I'm not going to be in the clubs. So how can I be part of this conversation? And as a novelist, that's one of the things that was really important to me to write about it, right? So in the book, what's happening are all the same questions that I chewed on in my, early aughts show, Thieves in the Temple, The Reclaiming of Hip Hop, sexism in hip hop, commercialism in hip hop. What are the messages that are going out to the community? Do these messages reflect people's real lives and authentic concerns? The corporatization of hip hop. It was really fun to write this music label, Paperclip Records, this imaginary label that's just always doing something shady. They're always like doing this and doing that. And, that's one of the things that's really fun at Kensington and writing series. I've loved writing series. And I really think of this whole, Desa, this book is technically a standalone novel, but I really, in my mind, like Marvel or DC, I have my Justice Hustlers universe, right? And so Paperclip Record is the shady record company. And I'm even thinking of some future books like, ooh, a Paperclip Records book, what could happen? A la, the TV show Empire. What could happen with this record label? What kind of drama? Um, And so those are the things about hip hop, with this corporate music industry. Where How is it that women are constantly fighting for their place? And one of the things that I love that you mentioned the author's note, because like all, all of the behind the scenes, it's like the making of, right? My author's note, it was really, really powerful when I read Sofia Quintero's Explicit Content, which came out a while back, but really was like the hip hop milieu of the time. Like it had the cultural landscape. And I realized that my early draft of this book did not have the cultural landscape. And I needed to change that or was just going to fall flat, right? Because hip hop is so like about a given moment in music and in politics and within the Black community and Black politics. So that was powerful. And then I was like, I need a consultant. When in doubt, get somebody else to read it. So I had, really my favorite rap artist and activist, Coco Pela, consult on the book, like, what does it need? And she was like, it needs this. So, and she's someone who I really pay attention to and listen to because she, as a rap artist and an activist and a feminist, is really thinking about like what is happening in hip hop. Um, and how is it that women are engaging hip hop, being engaged by hip hop, being impacted by hip hop, and is always putting out great content around, kind of feminist visions and, even climate action visions within hip hop. Um, and so I think, unfortunately, given the, ever, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Ever escalating misogyny, hip hop continues to be the home of lots of misogyny. And we're also seeing some women's voices taking up more space. I'm really excited about Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. And we're also seeing the way that in typical hip hop fashion, the voices of women that end up taking up a lot of space are often heavily sexualized. And I'm not critical of those women for doing their thing. Like that totally gets to be their thing and they do it fabulously. And we see how consistently the music industry picks women to amplify and, blast who are super sexualized. And so, it continues to be a challenge to find super mainstream voices of women in the hip hop world that are talking about stuff other than sex and love. And so that was one of the things that I was playing with, was the idea, like, what if someone had been fully positioned to do that, but then something happened and, like with this police shooting, suddenly there was this other compelling conversation that they were pulled into. And that was really exciting. And I have to say, the thanks for that one really go to my editor, Essie Soga, because earlier in the story, there was just less of that. And she was like, we need more social justice drama. And I was like, oh, what if this? What if that? And so that came out of those conversations.
Essie is very good at those conversations. Love when she starts throwing out ideas because they're always fun to listen to. We have just a few more minutes left, so I'm going to hop over to our reader questions. We have a couple waiting. Um, I'm always a fan of this one. As far as like a craft question, how do you choose the names for your characters? Names have such power and draw for a story. So how do you go about that?
It's so interesting. I do sometimes names come to me, bam, and then if they do, that's their name, and that's just sometimes their name. Then sometimes I have to look it up sometimes I do look on websites like Greek names, Greek surnames, Nigerian names, Yoruba names, Latin names, sometimes they just come to me. It's interesting. I'm trying to remember because Damian now is Damian, but I think he was originally Juan. I think he was originally Juan, but then it worked for the Miami DJ to be DJ Wonderful, And so then I was like, oh, now he's Juan. So he's got to be something else. So, and then Damian just, felt right to me. But it's interesting because I had a character in the book doesn't have a title, but it's my book for next year, which is written but untitled. And the character originally was a white character, and I named her Megan because I was like, that's, kind of a good white girl name from her generation. And then, the book went through some changes. I was like, oh, I want her to be a mixed heritage woman who is sort of like, you know, trying to marry this billionaire guy. And then she was like this mixed heritage Meghan. I was like, no, it's too Meghan Markle. So I had to change her name to Morgan, which feels fine. But it's like in my mind, I haven't made the leap yet. She's still Megan. Sometimes when I'm revising, I write Megan. So it's hilarious. Yeah. So names, yeah, I do both. They pop into my mind, or I do long hours of research on the internet to find the name with the right sound.
I will just say the pun of DJ Wonderful is like, it's one of my favorites. So I'm glad that that change got made. And then we're going to do one more question. We're going to go just a couple minutes over because I love this question. It's one of the ones I like to ask too. Oop, wrong one. If you were to give a new writer just one word of advice that you wish you had been given when you were starting out, what would it be?
Well, I'm gonna go heavy for this one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this, you need to have stamina, a certain kind of emotional stamina. And it's a certain stamina for it's gonna take getting where you want to be as a writer is gonna take longer, require more work, and have more setbacks. And you have to um for me, it has been really, really important to look at what gets triggered when I have to wait. I get told no, I get disappointed, just to really look at, to do the therapy piece, right? Of dealing with your emotions and mental health around being a writer. That for me has been half the battle, because it's taken decades and decades for me to be where I wanted to be. And yeah, so I think that would be the thing that nobody really told me. People would just say, be strong, right? It'll be tough. It was almost like cautionary, but really more like, it's been more important for me to sort of look at like, what were the hard things that happened early on in my life that made me feel discouraged, so that I can, in the moment as an adult, say, okay, that was very discouraging, but this isn't my childhood. I'm a grown woman and I'm going to keep trying. And then the other piece of advice that I really would give for me as a novelist, it was great to spend some years doing shorter performative stuff, like doing poetry and spoken word in public spaces, so I could have a sense of myself as a writer in the world before I finished a whole novel. It was really great to get to be out in community as a writer before I, had finished the multi-decade project of writing a novel I was pleased with. So I would say, both of those things. Um, do the internal work to give you the stamina to go through the process, and also find ways to get to write shorter stuff, have community, and have an audience in the meantime.
I think that is perfect advice on both of those aspects. So thank you so much for that, and for sharing a little bit about your background and your story and why you give that advice. And yeah, so that is the end of our half hour. And I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us, and to all the readers who tuned in. Your questions were amazing. I loved the comments you guys were leaving. It's always so much fun to chat with you, and thank you for putting up with all the tech issues.
Yeah, it's a delight to be with you. Great questions from you. Great questions from the audience. Thanks for tuning in, y'all.
Absolutely. So thank you everyone for joining us. And I will be announcing our flash giveaway winner in the comments later this afternoon. So stay tuned, and we will chat with you guys next time. Bye.